My name is Mia Bennett, and I'm 34 years old. The Christmas dinner table was dressed with the same red tablecloth my mom brought out every single year, the same mismatched wine glasses, and the same candle centerpiece that had somehow survived 3 different house moves. I sat between my Aunt Sheila and my sister Renata, holding a glass of white wine I hadn't touched in nearly 20 minutes because, deep down, I already knew exactly where the evening was headed. Renata had that look. The one she always got right before she'd throw out one of her little jokes and pretend she was just kidding. She'd already knocked back 2 glasses of Prosecco, and after the second one, her voice always changed. It got sharper, like the alcohol stripped away whatever filter she usually had. My dad stood at the head of the table carving the turkey, while my mom kept passing around bowls of mashed potatoes. My nephew was busy stacking dinner rolls into a little tower, completely in his own world, when Renata casually set down her fork and turned toward me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "So, Mia," she said, tilting her head, 35 and still single? She smirked. "Man, Christmas must be kinda lonely for you, huh?" The table went quiet for maybe half a second. Then, everyone cracked up. Uncle Pete laughed first. My cousin Dana snorted into her napkin. And before I knew it, the laughter rolled down the table like a wave. Everyone acted like Renata had just delivered the funniest punchline of the year. I felt the warmth creep across my face, not exactly from embarrassment, but from that all-too-familiar sting of being my family's favorite target. All wrapped up as just a joke. This wasn't anything new. Renata had been doing this ever since we were teenagers, always finding whatever insecurity she thought I had that year and poking at it. And somehow, every single year, someone sitting at that table figured it was hilarious. I glanced at my mother, hoping she'd do what moms are supposed to do: shut it down. Instead, she gave me that practiced little smile she always used whenever she wanted to keep the peace without actually dealing with the problem. "She's only joking, Mia," she said gently. "Don't be so sensitive." I'd heard those words more times than I could count. And every single time, they really meant one thing: stop making everyone else uncomfortable just because you're hurting. In 34 years, my mother had never once told Renata to stop. She'd only ever told me to stop reacting. Sure, I could have raised my voice. I could have slammed my napkin onto the table and stormed out like something straight out of a TV drama. But that would have given Renata exactly what she wanted: more attention, more drama, more proof that I was the emotional one who couldn't take a joke. So instead, I did something much quieter. I slowly set my wine glass on the table, the base making a soft clink against the wood, and looked my sister straight in the eyes. "Don't worry about me," I said, my voice calm, almost pleasant. "I've actually been married for quite a while." This time, nobody laughed. My mother had been lifting her own glass to make a toast, but she froze mid-motion, her arm hanging in the air as if someone had suddenly pressed pause. The smug smile on Renata's face instantly began to fade. Confusion flashed across her eyes because, in her mind, she already had my entire life figured out. I was supposed to be the lonely, single older sister, the cautionary tale she loved comparing herself to while showing off her husband and 2 kids. A married Mia? Yeah, that didn't fit her story at all. "What are you even talking about?" Renata asked, forcing out a nervous laugh. "Since when are you married? You never told anybody." I let the silence settle over the table for a few seconds. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself. They were. 3 years, I answered simply. "You just never asked." My father stopped carving the turkey altogether, the knife suspended in his hand as he looked back and forth between me and my mother, trying to decide whether this was some kind of joke. It wasn't. And judging by the silence around the table, everyone knew it. My mother slowly lowered her glass, completely forgetting about the toast. Her confused expression shifted into something much closer to panic. "Mia," she said carefully, "why wouldn't you tell your own family that you got married?" I picked up my wine glass again and finally took my first sip. I let her question hang there because, honestly, the answer was sitting right in front of everyone at that table. It was wrapped in that old red tablecloth. The mashed potatoes, the forced smiles, and 34 years of being treated like the family's favorite punchline. I hadn't kept my marriage a secret because I was ashamed. I kept it quiet because, for the first time in my adult life, I'd built something that truly belonged to me. Something Renata couldn't twist into another cheap joke. Something my mother couldn't smooth over with one of her rehearsed smiles and a quick, "Don't be so sensitive." As I looked around the table at every familiar face, I realized the truth wasn't going to stay buried much longer. Because the look on my mother's face told me she had already started piecing it together. She knew exactly who I'd married. And man, she had every reason to be nervous about what was coming next. Part 3. The silence from my mother stretched so long that my father finally laid the carving knife down completely. Renata still sat there holding her half-empty glass of Prosecco, looking back and forth between us like she'd suddenly wandered into a movie without the script. I let the moment breathe. For years, I'd been the one desperately searching for the right words at this table. Now, it was somebody else's turn. "His name is Julian," I finally said. Julian Ashworth. The name landed like a rock dropping into perfectly still water. My mother's face instantly lost its color. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. My father's jaw locked so hard I could see the muscles flex. Even Renata, who'd been laughing about my lonely Christmas only moments earlier, suddenly looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Julian wasn't just another name in our family's history. 3 years earlier, my father's construction company had nearly gone under after a major contract dispute with a much bigger firm, a company owned by the Ashworth family. For months, my father told anyone who'd listen that the Ashworths had buried him under lawyers and couldn't care less whose lives they destroyed. I remembered sitting in this very dining room, listening to him vent night after night while my mother nodded along, both of them completely convinced the Ashworth family were the villains in our story. What none of them knew was that I'd met Julian almost 4 years earlier at a business conference they barely remembered me attending, long before that contract dispute ever happened. Our relationship had nothing to do with boardrooms, contracts, or business deals. It was simply about two people who genuinely cared about each other. When the legal battle started, I made a choice. I kept my personal life completely separate from my father's resentment. Not because I was embarrassed. Heck, not even close. I stayed quiet because I already knew exactly how my family treated people they didn't approve of. I'd watched them tear apart Renata's college boyfriend. I'd watched them pick apart my cousin's fiancé. Truth be told, anyone who didn't fit the image they'd built in their heads automatically became the outsider. So I protected what mattered. Julian and I quietly got married in a small ceremony with just 12 guests. Not one of them was sitting around this Christmas table. Meanwhile, I let my family keep believing I was still the same lonely single Mia they loved making jokes about. "You married into the family that almost ruined us," my father finally said, his voice low and heavy with disbelief. The anger underneath it was starting to show. I met his eyes without looking away. "They didn't ruin us, Dad. Our proposal fell apart because the bid was underpriced. The numbers simply didn't work." I read every page of the paperwork. I know the difference. For the first time that night, nobody had a comeback. Part 4. My mother slammed her wine glass onto the table hard enough to make it rattle against her plate. "So all this time," she said, her voice shaking with disbelief, "while your father was lying awake night after night over that disaster, you were sleeping with the enemy?" "I wasn't sleeping with the enemy," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I was building a life." For the first time that evening, there was a sharp edge in my words. Sharp enough that Renata actually flinched. While everyone sitting around this table was busy convincing themselves I was pathetic. Because I was single. I was married to a man who has shown me more respect than anyone in this room ever has. While Renata kept cracking jokes about how lonely my Christmas must be, I was spending every holiday with a family that has never once made me feel small. Not once. The room fell completely silent. It was the kind of silence that used to scare me when I was a little girl. The kind that usually meant someone was about to get in serious trouble. Only this time, it wasn't me. And everyone at that table knew it. The smug look on Renata's face had completely disappeared. Now she looked embarrassed, ashamed, because with just a few honest sentences, I'd turned the exact insult she'd thrown at me right back on the entire family. My nephew, completely unaware of the tension filling the room, kept stacking dinner rolls into his little tower like nothing had changed. Honestly, I kinda envied him. My mother finally spoke again. This time, her voice was much quieter, almost pleading. Why didn't you just tell us, Mia? We're your family. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because every single time I've ever brought someone into my life, this family found a way to make them feel like they didn't belong. And every single time someone laughed at my expense, you smiled and told me not to be so sensitive. I took a slow breath before finishing. I didn't hide my marriage because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I wanted to protect it from all of you. No one said another word. My father stared silently at his plate. My mother's eyes filled with tears, caught somewhere between guilt and complete shock. Renata just sat there, still holding her forgotten glass of Prosecco. The joke she'd been so proud of barely half an hour earlier now sat in the middle of the table like a heavy stone nobody wanted to touch. I finished the last sip of my wine, slowly stood up, and thanked my mother for dinner. My voice stayed calm. My hands never shook, because for the first time in my life, I was walking out of that house exactly the way I wanted, on my own terms. My head held high, with absolutely nothing left unsaid. If you've ever been forced to sit at a table where your own family treated you like the punchline, then you already know how powerful it feels to finally take your life and your voice back. And if this story hit home for you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing family here on Revenge Unfolded. Trust me, the next story is one you won't want to miss.